Getting off work 3 hours early, I hid in the walk-in closet, planning to play a silly prank on my husband. Unexpectedly, I watched him walk into our bedroom holding my sister-in-law in a passionate embrace. I smiled coldly. You guys like putting on a show, right? Let me be the director of this little play. There are jokes that seem trivial but end up becoming the very moments that strip away the illusions, revealing the most bitter truths in life. And I, a woman approaching middle age, never imagined that a childish whim would be the catalyst for me to see the true face of the husband I had loved deeply for years. That day, I got off work 3 hours earlier than usual. The power at my corporate office had suddenly gone out, and management sent everyone home. Walking to my car, my heart felt incredibly light. It had been a long time since I had a free afternoon. Suddenly, I thought of surprising my husband, Brian. On the way home, I stopped at Whole Foods to buy fresh wild-caught salmon and asparagus, planning to bake his favorite dinner. I also picked up some nice steaks and fresh vegetables, imagining a warm, intimate dinner for just the two of us. My mind was filled with simple, happy scenarios. Brian would be surprised, he would smile, and maybe he'd pull me into a tight hug like we were newlyweds again. But I never saw it coming. When I arrived home, I found the front door unlocked. Stepping inside, the house was dead silent. I figured Brian wasn't home yet, and my mother-in-law, Eleanor, who lived in the attached in-law suite, was out. A goofy, almost childish idea popped into my head. I wanted to hide, wait for Brian to come into the bedroom, and jump out to scare him just like I did when we were first married, making him jump so badly he nearly dropped his phone. Smiling to myself, I quietly slipped into the master bedroom, opened the door to the walk-in closet, and stepped inside. The narrow space and the familiar scent of our clothes tickled my nose. I told myself, just wait a few minutes, he'll be home soon. But I didn't expect that the person entering the room wouldn't be just my husband. I had barely pulled the closet door shut, still catching my breath, when I heard the front door open. Footsteps echoed, followed by a sound I couldn't possibly mistake. The sharp clack-clack of high heels striking the hardwood floor pierced the quiet house. My heart suddenly hammered against my ribs. A terrible premonition crept in. I held my breath, pressing my back flat against the closet wall, not daring to move an inch. The bedroom door opened, and then I heard a painfully familiar female voice. Chloe, my sister-in-law. Before I could even process what was happening, I heard their footsteps approach the bed. Through the slats of the closet door, I saw a sight that still suffocates me to this day. My husband, Brian, walked into the room with Chloe. There was no polite distance between them, nothing resembling the brother and sister-in-law dynamic they always displayed in front of me. They were holding each other. It was a completely natural, intimate embrace, without a shred of awkwardness. I stood frozen in the closet. My whole body turned to ice. My ears were ringing, but every word they spoke cut through the air with agonizing clarity. Chloe rested her head on my husband's shoulder. Her voice was soft, but the words felt like daggers. Living with Aaron is suffocating, Brian. It's only when I'm near you that I can finally breathe. That wasn't the voice of the fragile, timid sister-in-law I thought I knew. It was whiny, sweet, and possessive. It made my skin crawl. Brian didn't push her away. Instead, he stroked her hair. His voice softened as he coaxed her. Shh, I told you. Just leave everything to me. Don't stress your pretty head about it. Let me handle it. It was the exact phrase he used to say to me to calm my anxieties. Now, he was using it on his brother's wife. I stopped feeling anything. There was no explosive anger, no sharp agony like people see in the movies. Just a void. A freezing, paralyzing emptiness. I stood in the dark. My fists were clenched so tightly my nails bit into my palms. Yet I felt no pain. I only felt that everything in my life, the entire foundation of this family, was shattering into a million pieces. They kept talking. Soft whispers. Quiet giggles, each sound slicing into my soul like a scalpel. I didn't burst out. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. For some inexplicable reason, right at that moment, I actually laughed. It was a very quiet, breathy laugh, but so incredibly cold that I felt like a stranger to myself. Only one thought echoed in my mind. So this is how it's been all along, and I am the absolute last to know. Then another thought surfaced, not born of pain, but of crystal clear realization. I asked myself, if I walk out there right now, what will I do? Scream? Cry? Beg for an explanation? No. I refused to be that pathetic woman. I took a deep breath, forcing my heart rate to slow. I remained hidden in the dark, listening to everything, recording every word, every tone of their voices into my memory. And then, I smiled. Not a subconscious smile, but one full of calculation. All right, since you love putting on a secret play behind my back, let me produce a blockbuster for you. I don't know how long I stood there. All I know is that when they finally left the room and the door clicked shut, I slowly pushed the closet door open. The bedroom looked exactly the same as when I had entered it. But the woman stepping out of that closet was no longer the same woman from an hour ago. I smoothed my hair, straightened my clothes, and looked in the mirror. My face looked completely normal. No one would ever guess what had just transpired. I walked out to the kitchen and placed the Whole Foods grocery bags on the granite counter. Everything was so neat. The house felt so familiar. Only my heart had been irrevocably altered. I didn't want to ask questions anymore. I didn't want to trust anymore. I only had one goal, to make them pay not with my tears, but with the very theatrical production they had started. And this time, I would be the one writing the script. I stood in the kitchen for a very long time that afternoon. My hands rested on the paper bags I hadn't yet unpacked. The salmon sat silently in its wrapping. The asparagus was still damp. Everything in front of me was perfectly intact, but my marriage was dead. And in that frozen moment, memories of the last few years suddenly flashed through my mind with sickening clarity. Every face, every word. Every time I had gaslighted myself by saying, "It's probably just my imagination." Brian and I had been married for exactly 5 years. Compared to a lot of couples, our wedding wasn't extravagant, but from the outside, we lived a comfortable, upper-middle-class suburban life. He ran a wholesale construction supply business, while I was a CPA at a private accounting firm. I handled most of the finance boo. From our joint income to the big mortgages and minor bills, I was the one who tracked, calculated, and budgeted. Brian used to brag to his friends at barbecues. I let the wife hold the purse strings so we don't go broke. I'm terrible with money. Whenever I heard that, my heart warmed. I thought he trusted me entirely, which was why he surrendered control. Brian's family wasn't large. His father passed away years ago. It was just his mother, Eleanor, Brian, the eldest, and his younger brother, Aaron. Aaron was 4 years younger and had a completely different temperament. While Brian always appeared calm, patient, and reserved in public, Aaron was a hothead. He was impulsive, did whatever he wanted, hated rules, and couldn't hold down a job. Since I first joined the family, I saw that Aaron was allergic to hard work. He changed jobs like he changed shirts. 1 month he was doing logistics for a distributor. A few months later, he and a buddy pooled their cash to open a vape shop and espresso bar. It went under before the first year was up. Nobody knew how much he actually made, but he always dressed in designer brands and had the newest iPhone Pro. If his buddies texted him to hit the sports bar, he was out the door in seconds. There were months when Aaron couldn't even chip in for his mother's groceries, yet he loved showing off, maintaining his alpha image, and fishing for compliments. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, spoiled her youngest son rotten. She'd always make excuses. Aaron just hasn't caught his lucky break yet. He hasn't found his true calling. He's actually the smartest one in this family. Hearing it constantly, I just got used to it. In this house, whatever Aaron did right or wrong was always justified. I only found it annoying back then. I didn't think too deeply about it. It was only later I realized that this blind, enabling behavior had rotted the foundation of their entire family. About a year after Brian and I got married, Aaron brought Chloe home to meet everyone. Chloe was very young, then petite, fair-skinned, soft-spoken, and overly polite. She worked at a Macy's makeup counter and came from a lower-income background. So when she first came around, everyone assumed she was a sweet, easygoing girl. I thought so too. I even pitied her, thinking that marrying a guy like Aaron would only bring her misery. And surely enough, Chloe's life after marriage wasn't the fairy tale she imagined. Aaron, who loved goofing off, also possessed a bizarre, toxic jealousy. It wasn't born out of deep love, but rather a territorial obsession. He viewed his wife as his personal property. He controlled her, loved flexing his authority, and demanded absolute submission. He would snatch Chloe's phone at any time to inspect it. He read every text message with her coworkers, male or female. One evening during a family dinner, just because Chloe smiled while texting back a coworker, Erin snatched her phone, slammed it onto the dining table, and barked, "Who the hell are you smiling at? You're a married woman, stop acting like a slut." Chloe just looked down, trembling, whispering that she was just texting her shift manager. But Erin never listened. The more she explained, the more enraged he became. Eleanor, sitting right there, didn't reprimand her son at all. Instead, she sighed and said, "Chloe, a wife needs to know her place. Don't do things that provoke your husband." Hearing that, a lump formed in my throat. But because it was my brother-in-law's marriage, I couldn't overstep my boundaries. One time, things escalated violently. Chloe got home 15 minutes late because her store was doing end-of-the-month inventory. She had barely pulled her Honda Civic into the driveway when Erin stormed out of the house, yanked her out of the driver's seat, slapped her hard across the face, and began screaming obscenities for the whole neighborhood to hear. "Where the hell were you? Who were you out screwing around with?" he roared. Chloe sobbed hysterically. Shaking as she explained, her manager made her stay to count stock. Erin didn't believe a word. He grabbed her phone and smashed it onto the concrete driveway until the screen shattered into pieces. I was standing by my kitchen window, watching the whole thing, shivering with disgust. But Eleanor just ran outside, grabbed Erin's arm, and hushed him. Okay, take it inside. The neighbors are going to call the cops. Settle this indoors. Not a single word about right or wrong. No defense for the girl who just got hit. From then on, Chloe started running to Eleanor to complain. One day, while I was cooking, I heard her crying in the living room, saying that living with Erin was like walking on eggshells. If she was 5 minutes late, she was interrogated and accused of cheating. Eleanor just waved her hand dismissively. Men are just like that. They have strong tempers. A woman has to be patient and soft. That's the only way a marriage survives. And so, Chloe's suffering was swept under the rug. Nobody truly defended her. Nobody forced Erin to get his act together. Realizing Eleanor was a dead end, Chloe changed her strategy. She stopped going to her mother-in-law and started going to Brian. At first, it was just little things that elicited pity. Sometimes she'd ask Brian to drive her to the pharmacy because she was afraid Erin would get mad if she took the car. Sometimes she'd stand in our driveway and ask Brian to come outside just to vent, claiming Brian was the only person in the family who would listen to her. One afternoon, I saw her sitting on our back patio, her eyes swollen from crying. Brian stood beside her, speaking in a soft, soothing tone. "It's okay. I'll talk some sense into Erin later." Honestly, the first few times I saw this, I didn't suspect a thing. I actually thought my husband was a deeply compassionate man. I thought, in a family where everyone either enables abuse or looks the other way, Brian is the only one decent enough to stand up for his sister-in-law. I even warned him once. "Honey, don't get too involved. Erin might take it the wrong way." Brian had looked at me with a gentle smile. "I just feel bad for her, babe. Who actually wants to get involved in someone else's marriage?" I believed him. I believed he was just empathetic. I believed Chloe was just a desperate, abused girl looking for a temporary safe harbor in her in-laws' home. I believed their conversations were purely platonic. And because I was so blindly trusting, I failed to see the monster growing right in front of my eyes. Looking back now, I realize that danger rarely strikes like a bolt of lightning from a clear sky. It arrives when people allow themselves to cross one tiny boundary, and then another. Until eventually, they've gone so far off the path that neither has the conscience to turn back. Meanwhile, I was still naive, thinking it was just empathy. Without realizing it, I was nurturing a parasite inside my own home. What begins as pity can easily slide into something else, especially when the people involved actively allow it to slide, with no intention of pulling the brakes. After the phase where Chloe constantly sought Brian out to vent, the atmosphere in our house subtly shifted in ways that were hard to articulate. To an outsider, we looked like a perfectly normal American family. But living inside it, I felt the decay inch by inch. The lines of appropriateness began to blur. It started with late-night text messages. We'd be eating dinner or getting ready for bed, and Brian's iPhone screen would continuously light up. He'd grab it, furrow his brows slightly, and take his phone out to the balcony or the backyard. Initially, he'd casually tell me, "It's Chloe. Erin's having another meltdown." Hearing that, I didn't stress over it. In my mind, she was just texting her brother-in-law to keep from having a panic attack. But one time, I accidentally saw a few lines of a text on Brian's phone while it was sitting on the coffee table. Just a glance, but enough to read it. Aaron is suspicious of me again. I'm so exhausted. Then another text popped up. I don't know who else to talk to. I genuinely felt bad for her. A young woman trapped with an abusive, insanely jealous husband, constantly interrogated with no one taking her side. If she needed her brother-in-law to ease her mind, it wasn't crossing a line. But the texts became more frequent. From every few days, it became almost every night. Brian, who used to send short replies, started spending way too much time glued to his screen. One evening, while I was setting the dining table, I called him 3 times for dinner. He stayed glued to the living room couch, thumbs flying across his screen. When I nagged him, he just said, "Go ahead and eat without me." I need to text her back. She's really spiraling. Once or twice is fine, but as it became a routine, an uneasy knot formed in my stomach. Then, texts turned into phone calls. One night, approaching 11 p.m., I was drifting off to sleep when I heard his phone vibrate. Brian immediately sat up, checked the screen, and slipped out of the bedroom. Lying in the dark, I could hear his muffled voice down the hallway. I couldn't make out the words. Just a faint, I know, stop crying. Just calm down. He came back to bed much later. I laid facing the wall, a heavy feeling settling in my chest. I started paying closer attention, and the more I watched, the more I noticed Brian devoting an inappropriate amount of time to Chloe, far more than a brother-in-law ever should. One Sunday, after I finished making lunch, I called him repeatedly, but he didn't answer. When I carried the plates to the table, I looked out the window and saw him standing at the end of our cul-de-sac, talking to Chloe. They talked for so long that I had to reheat the soup twice. When I asked him about it, he brushed me off. She had a blowout with Aaron. I was just letting her vent. He acted as if my asking was an annoying overreaction to something completely trivial. The climax of this phase happened one afternoon. Aaron had come home drunk, and Chloe fled to our house. Her eyes were puffy, her hair was a mess, and her face was pale. She walked in, slumped onto our sofa, and sobbed hysterically. I was washing vegetables in the kitchen, heard the crying, and walked out. Brian was already sitting next to her. Chloe was telling him that Aaron had dug through her purse, searched her phone, and called her every name in the book. As she spoke, she leaned her body closer and closer to Brian. Her voice grew softer, her hands constantly wiping her tears. I stood paralyzed, a sickening feeling washing over me. Not because my sister-in-law was crying, but because of how she was sitting so close to my husband that their knees were practically touching. And Brian didn't flinch. He leaned in, pouring her water, handing her tissues, his focus entirely on her. When I gently intervened with a mild suggestion, "Chloe, maybe sit back a little bit? If the neighbors look through the window, it might give the wrong impression," Brian immediately whipped his head around and snapped at me. His voice was icy and irritated, shutting me down instantly. "Can't you see she's going through hell? You're her sister-in-law. Where is your basic human empathy?" That sentence felt like a bucket of ice water thrown in my face. I stood frozen, caught between shock and a sharp, stinging betrayal. Since when did a normal boundary-setting comment make me a cruel, petty villain? Before I could defend myself, Eleanor walked in from the garage. Without knowing the context, she immediately sided with her son. If she can't come to her older brother, who is she supposed to go to? "You have a dirty mind, Rachel. She's having a crisis, and instead of comforting her, you're giving her a sour face." Just like that, in the span of a single afternoon, I, the one who felt uncomfortable with my husband's inappropriate closeness, was branded as a narrow-minded, selfish shrew. Meanwhile, Chloe, whose actions were grossly crossing the line, was crowned the tragic victim in desperate need of a knight in shining armor. She sat there, eyes puffy, lips trembling, looking at me with a pathetic, wounded gaze. If I weren't the one standing in the middle of that room, I probably would have believed she was completely innocent. From that day on, I began to feel alienated in my own home. Every time Chloe showed up, the atmosphere shifted. All I had to do was furrow my brow or stay quiet for too long, and Eleanor would drop passive-aggressive hints that I was bullying my sister-in-law. Brian became increasingly impatient with me. Once, I casually asked, "Brian, what's going on with Chloe lately? Why is she calling you so much?" He snapped back defensively, "Stop making a mountain out of a molehill. She's already miserable, don't make it worse for her." That response choked me. It was painfully obvious that Chloe wasn't the only one feeling uncomfortable. I was his wife. I lived here too. I had feelings. I had pride. But somehow my feelings had become completely irrelevant. As long as Chloe cried, as long as Chloe complained, everyone took her side. Meanwhile, if I uttered a single word of caution, I was an insecure, heartless bitch. Then, an incident occurred that made it impossible for me to lie to myself any longer. I came home from work a little early one day. Entering through the side gate, I heard whispering near the patio. I was about to walk into the kitchen, but my eyes caught Brian standing with his back to me. Chloe was standing in front of him. They were talking in hushed tones. Before I could take a step closer, I saw Chloe's hand reach out and grasp Brian's hand. It wasn't an accidental brush. It was a deliberate, intimate hold. I stopped dead in my tracks. Just then, Brian turned his head and saw me. He panicked, pulling his hand away instantly. Chloe dropped her hand too, quickly looking down at the ground as if nothing had happened. My heart was pounding out of my chest. I walked closer, staring at the two of them, and asked in the calmest voice I could muster, even though my insides were screaming, "What are you two doing?" Brian answered first, speaking entirely too fast. "She's just depressed about her marriage. I was giving her some advice. That was it. No further explanation." He couldn't meet my eyes for more than a second. Chloe, however, lifted her head and gave me a faint smile. A smile that looked so innocent, yet sent chills down my spine. She said softly, "Rachel, please don't misunderstand. I just look at Brian as my rock." It sounded like a reasonable excuse, but hearing it made my skin crawl. What kind of rock requires holding hands in the corner of a yard? What kind of rock needs to be texted late into the night, making my husband abandon his dinner? I wanted to interrogate them, but I swallowed the words. I looked at Brian. He avoided my gaze. I looked at Chloe. She looked down, maintaining her flawless, innocent facade. And like I always did, I gaslighted myself again. Maybe they haven't crossed the line yet. Maybe it's just a blurred boundary between sympathy and closeness. Maybe I'm just being paranoid because Aaron is so toxic. But no matter how hard I tried to calm myself, I couldn't deny one truth. From that day forward, my heart was filled with absolute dread. I had hoped the anxiety was temporary, that things would cool off once Aaron stopped throwing tantrums, that Chloe would learn to keep her distance, and Brian would realize he was making me uncomfortable. But life doesn't care about what we hope for. Once people step over that first invisible line, they rarely stop. They just keep pushing, inch by inch, until nobody even remembers where the line used to be. After I caught Chloe holding Brian's hand, the tension in the house didn't improve, it became suffocating. Aaron seemed to be losing his mind. He didn't just check her phone, he began monitoring her like a parole officer. One time, walking past their house, I noticed a Wise camera mounted in the corner of their living room. At first, I thought it was for security, but I later overheard that Aaron had installed it specifically to spy on Chloe, to see when she left, what she did, and who she talked to while home. Because of this, Chloe had even more excuses to come over to our house. Sometimes she claimed her house was too suffocating, and she was terrified to even breathe. Other times she said Aaron was raging because of something he saw on the camera footage, and she needed a safe space to cool down. At first, Eleanor tried to maintain some boundaries. "Look, handle your marital issues under your own roof. Stop running over here every 5 minutes." But despite her words, she let Chloe stay. And Brian was always ready to roll out the red carpet. "Let her be, Mom. Let her have some peace here." Over time, Chloe's presence in our home became the new normal. And when the abnormal becomes normal, people easily ignore the glaring red flags. One evening, I finished cooking and walked into the living room. Chloe was already there, hugging a throw pillow, looking incredibly gloomy. Brian was sitting right beside her, his body leaning heavily toward hers, speaking in a hushed whisper. I walked in, and they didn't jump. They didn't even bother to shift their posture. It was that casual comfort that made me feel sick to my stomach. Then, one day, right in front of my face, Chloe stopped pretending entirely. That night, the whole family was watching Netflix after dinner. I walked out of the kitchen and saw Chloe sitting extremely close to Brian on the sectional. So close there wasn't an inch of space between them. When a jump scare happened on the TV, Chloe literally buried her face in Brian's shoulder, as if it were the most natural reflex in the world. Brian didn't pull away. He just smiled slightly and murmured, "It's just a movie. Don't be scared." My whole body went rigid. I stood there for several seconds, unable to believe my eyes. If they do this while I'm in the room, what the hell are they doing when I'm not? I set my glass down on the coffee table, a little harder than necessary. The sharp clink made them both turn. Chloe sat up straight, but there wasn't a hint of embarrassment on her face. Meanwhile, Brian glared at me with visible annoyance, as if I was the one ruining the vibe, not them. I tried to keep my voice as steady as possible, offering a very mild correction. Chloe, please sit properly. I raised no alarm and threw no tantrum. That single sentence was the product of monumental restraint. But Chloe just looked at me with a deeply wounded expression and whispered, I live under constant psychological torture, Rachel. Please don't make my life any harder than it already is. Hearing that, I almost laughed out loud. She was snuggling up to my husband, practically sitting in his lap in front of me, but I was making her life hard? Before I could even reply, Brian snapped at me. You're out of line, Rachel. She's going through hell and you're just kicking her while she's down. His voice wasn't loud, but it was dripping with ice. I stared at him, thinking I had misheard. I wasn't the one cuddling with my sibling's spouse. I wasn't the one letting my sister-in-law bury her face in my neck. But with one simple request for boundaries, I became the family bully. I didn't know when right and wrong had become so twisted in this house. Eleanor, hearing the commotion, walked out of the kitchen. Without asking what happened, she saw Chloe's teary eyes, clicked her tongue, and scolded me. Rachel, look at Chloe. She's a better woman than you. She handles so much abuse with grace. What more do you want from her? That sentence felt like a beautifully wrapped knife to the gut. I stood in the middle of the living room. In front of me was my husband. Beside me was my mother-in-law. Across from me was my sister-in-law. Suddenly, I felt entirely alone, like a stranger intruding on their perfect family. I had never felt so utterly isolated in my own home. From that day on, Chloe grew bolder. She shed the shy, timid act. Every time she came over, she immediately sat next to Brian as if it were her assigned seat. Her mouth was constantly running, complaining about Aaron's jealousy, his controlling nature, how he suffocated her. She wrapped every complaint in a veneer of fragility. But the more I listened, the more I realized her fragility was highly calculated. She knew exactly when and who to cling to. And Brian, I don't know when he stopped being the sympathetic brother-in-law and started acting like her white knight, defending her aggressively at every turn. Then the exact thing I feared most finally blew up, even though at the time I still didn't dare give it a name. One night, around 10 p.m., someone violently pounded on our front door. Aaron burst in, reeking of alcohol, his eyes bloodshot, his clothes disheveled. The second he saw Chloe sitting in our living room, he lunged, grabbing her arm and violently yanking her to her feet. Chaos erupted. Chloe screamed in pain. Brian immediately lunged forward, shoved Aaron back, and roared, "What the hell is wrong with you? If you have a problem, use your words." Aaron slapped Brian's hands away, pointed a shaking finger at Chloe's face, and screamed at the top of his lungs. You come over here to vent, or are you coming over here to screw around? You think I'm a fucking idiot? Those words made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Not because of the profanity, but because, for the very first time, the horrifying suspicion I had been suppressing was spoken aloud by someone else. In that split second, I clearly saw Brian's face tighten in panic, while Chloe immediately buried her face in her hands and wailed. Eleanor rushed into the room to intervene, screaming at Aaron for waking up the neighbors. After a chaotic screaming match, Aaron dragged a sobbing Chloe back to their house. But the drama didn't end there. The next morning, Chloe returned looking worse than ever. Her wrists were bruised, her eyes were swollen shut, and her voice was hoarse. She sat in front of Brian and sobbed, telling him Aaron had beaten her, accused her of cheating, and called her a whore. As she spoke, she stared up at Brian as if he were her only savior on earth. I sat right next to her, but I felt completely invisible, because the way Brian looked at Chloe in that moment had fundamentally changed. It wasn't pity anymore. It wasn't the fleeting tenderness of a man protecting a victim. It was something deeper, heavier, and far more dangerous. It was a look that confirmed, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that every boundary had been incinerated. And right then, I finally understood the one thing I had been desperately trying to ignore. Pity, when misplaced, when allowed to fester, when nurtured by one person and exploited by another, becomes the most beautiful excuse for absolute betrayal. After seeing the look in Brian's eyes that morning, my anxiety morphed into a crushing weight, like a boulder pressing on my chest. I didn't say a word, nor did I throw a fit. But from that day on, I started watching everything in our house like a hawk, especially our finances. I was used to managing the big expenses: mortgage, utilities, groceries, and our joint savings account. Almost every month, I tracked it meticulously. There are things you chalk up to trust when you're happy. But when your heart is broken, those same numbers are the first to expose the truth. It was the end of the month. Like always, I sat down to reconcile our budget. It started as a routine check on the Chase banking app. But when the dashboard loaded, I froze. The balance in our joint savings was significantly lower than I remembered. It wasn't just a few $100s off from minor expenses. It was a massive withdrawal. Enough to make my stomach drop. I thought I made a mistake. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a large annual bill auto-drafted that I forgot about. But the deeper I dug into the transaction history, the colder my blood ran. Yes. A massive wire transfer had been initiated 3 days ago. And what made my hands start shaking was the memo line. It was incredibly brief. Startup loan. I sat paralyzed in front of the screen. A startup loan for who? I didn't even need to guess. I clicked to see the recipient details. The name appeared clear as day. Chloe. I stared at that name for a very long time, my eyes burning because I forgot to blink. My fingers went numb. So it wasn't just late-night texts, longing stares, sitting too close, and aggressive gaslighting. There was money involved. And once money gets involved, it's no longer just pity. No man casually drains thousands of dollars from a joint marital account to give to his sister-in-law without saying a single word to his wife, out of pure, innocent pity. I sat in silence for a few minutes, then stood up and marched straight into the master bedroom. Brian had just gotten off work and was changing out of his button-down. Seeing my expression, he casually asked, "What's wrong?" His casual demeanor made me want to vomit. I held up my iPhone, shoved the screen directly in his face, pointed at the transaction, and demanded, "What the hell is this?" Brian glanced at the screen. I saw his eyes halt for a fraction of a second, but almost immediately, he regained his composure. His voice was flat, as if we were discussing the grocery list. "Oh, that." I wired Chloe a little cash. She wants to rent her own apartment to get away from Aaron for a while. Hearing that, my throat closed up. A massive chunk of our life savings, and to him, it was a little cash. I fought to keep my voice from shaking. "Brian, you transferred that much money without discussing it with me at all?" Now, Brian's expression changed. The fake calm vanished, replaced by the defensive irritation he always deployed when I pushed back. He slammed his dresser drawer shut and snapped, "Why do I need your permission? She's my sister-in-law. She's in danger." "Yeah, you're helping her out a little," I said, staring dead into my husband's eyes, refusing to back down for the first time. "Or have you been helping her out so much it's become a habit?" The tension in the room skyrocketed. Brian turned around, his eyes darkening. But I didn't stop. I asked the question I had been burying for months. "Explain it to me, Brian. What exactly do you view her as? Your sister-in-law, or something else?" The question hung in the air, suffocating the room. Brian froze, his face turning an ugly shade of red, and his voice boomed. "What the fuck are you talking about?" I fired back, holding nothing in. "I'm calling it like I see it. What you view her as, only you know for sure." For the first time in a long time, there were no tears in my eyes, only an Arctic chill creeping through my veins. Just as the tension peaked, Chloe walked into the hallway. She had probably heard the screaming and had been standing by the door. She didn't look flustered or shocked, like someone whose name was just dragged into a marital fight. Instead, she stood perfectly still, her posture straight, staring at me for a very long time. There was no fragility or victimhood in her eyes anymore. She didn't say a word, but her gaze told me everything. She wasn't scared. Buried deep in that stare was a challenge. Eleanor, hearing the shouting, also ran into the room. Before she could even ask, "What's going on?" Brian cut her off, sounding intensely aggrieved. "She's being a paranoid psycho again. I gave Chloe a little money to help her out, and Rachel is acting like she caught me committing a felony." Hearing that, Eleanor didn't need to know the facts. She glared at me with absolute venom. What is your problem now? Family helps family. What's wrong with a few dollars? I turned to look at her, my heart filled with toxic bitterness. Help her out how, Eleanor? He drained a massive amount from our joint savings, and as his wife, I wasn't told a damn thing. Eleanor waved her hand dismissively, scoffing. Oh, please, that's money my son worked for. If he wants to help his brother's wife, what's the crime? You are so insanely jealous and disrespectful. No wonder this house is never peaceful. I stared at her without blinking. So, in her eyes, I was the lunatic. While her son secretly funding his sister-in-law's escape plan was perfectly normal, I had never felt so profoundly degraded. The room was a powder keg when, suddenly, the screech of tires echoed from the driveway, followed by heavy, frantic footsteps. Aaron burst into the bedroom. His face was purple with rage, his eyes bulging like a cornered animal. He pointed a shaking finger straight at Chloe, his voice gravelly with fury. What the fuck are you doing over here? You think I don't know? You can screw around with whoever you want, but my own fucking brother? What do you take me for? The entire house fell dead silent. I never expected Aaron to show up right then, let alone lay it all out so bluntly. Chloe's face drained of color, but what devastated me was Brian's reaction. He didn't act like an innocent man wrongly accused. He didn't panic or try to de-escalate. Instead, he stepped forward, shielded Chloe with his body, and shoved Aaron violently backward. Back the fuck off, Brian roared. If you have a problem, handle it like a man. I stood there, watching my husband physically shield his sister-in-law, while shoving his own flesh and blood like a trespasser. In that split second, whatever delusions I had left shattered into dust. If there was only pity between them, Brian wouldn't have reacted with that raw, primal instinct. If he were clean, he wouldn't have prioritized protecting her. And if this was all a big misunderstanding, I wouldn't be standing in my own bedroom feeling like a ghost in my own marriage. The ensuing fight tore the house apart. Aaron screamed obscenities. Eleanor shrieked. Chloe wailed. And Brian barked orders, desperately trying to cover it all up. But I didn't say another word. I backed out of the room, walked straight to the kitchen, and sat down at the island. Outside, the chaos continued. Inside my head, the puzzle pieces of the last few months were snapping together with terrifying precision. The late-night texts, the irrational defensiveness, the avoided eye contact, holding hands by the patio, the secret wire transfers, none of these were isolated incidents anymore. That night, when the house finally quieted down, I sat alone in the dark. I shed no tears, nor did I feel the agonizing pain of a woman freshly betrayed. I just felt an unprecedented mental clarity. I had no more doubts. The only thing I lacked was hard evidence, and if God had allowed me to see this much, I would dig up the rest with my own 2 hands, which brought me to the closet. Luckily, when I had hidden in the walk-in closet that afternoon, acting on pure gut instinct, I had done the most crucial thing. When I saw Brian embrace Chloe right in front of my eyes, my hands shook so badly I almost dropped my phone. But through the shock, I knew one thing. If I jumped out and confronted them, I'd just get gaslighted, manipulated by Chloe's fake tears, and ultimately labeled the crazy, jealous wife. But if I captured it on video, no matter how slick they couldn't erase reality. I had stood in the closet, holding my breath, recording the entire sequence. Chloe resting her head on his shoulder, Brian stroking her hair. The hushed, intimate tones reserved only for lovers. The video wasn't long, but it was damning. Just watching it once was enough to turn my blood to ice. After they left the room, I had slipped out, fixed my clothes, put my phone in my purse, and walked into the kitchen as if nothing had happened. I knew I couldn't be reckless. That evening, I prepared dinner as usual. I set the plates, took the baked salmon out of the oven, and sat at the dining table like a perfectly normal wife. It was probably this exact eerie calmness that made Brian suspicious. Throughout dinner, he kept shooting me assessing glances, while I acted sweeter than usual. I even purposely served Eleanor extra helpings and made polite small talk with Chloe when she inevitably came over to freeload on our couch. My perfectly normal behavior made it impossible for them to read me. Near the end of the meal, Brian finally cracked and asked, "You're acting awfully chipper for someone who came home early today." I put my fork down, looked him dead in the eye, and delivered a single sentence. "Yeah, I came home early hoping to catch a surprise." The moment the words left my mouth, Brian's hand, holding his fork, froze midair. It was just a fraction of a second, but I caught it. Chloe, sitting next to him, snapped her head down, her fingers gripping the edge of her chair so hard her knuckles turned white. Nobody said a word, but that deafening silence was all the confirmation I needed. They were guilty as sin. In the following days, I completely changed my strategy. I stopped acting jealous. I stopped making sarcastic comments. I never brought up the wired money again, and certainly not the afternoon in the closet. I chose the hardest path for a betrayed woman. Silence. I stayed quiet to watch, to listen, to wait for them to expose themselves further. Sometimes, while washing dishes and hearing Brian and Chloe giggling in the living room, my heart still stung, but I swallowed it. I knew if I lost my cool now, all I had was one short video and a mountain of suspicions. I needed a nuclear arsenal. I started paying attention to Brian's phone. One night while he was in the shower, I seized the opportunity to check it, but what I found made me even colder. There was almost not a single text between him and Chloe. The call log was spotless, wiped so thoroughly there wasn't a trace left. That extreme paranoia was the loudest proof that this wasn't their first rodeo. Innocent people don't scrub their digital footprint. I put the phone back, my heart freezing over. They weren't just cheating, they were professional about it. From that day on, my acting improved. I purposely acted like I trusted Brian implicitly. One afternoon, in front of Eleanor, I even said work was getting crazy busy. Thank God Chloe comes over so much, otherwise the house would be too quiet, I chimed. Chloe looked at me like I had grown a second head. She probably couldn't fathom why a woman who had been so hostile had flipped a switch so quickly. But soon enough, she felt secure again. Parasites like Chloe only believe what benefits them. Seeing me back off, she thought I was intimidated. Seeing me quiet, she thought I was stupid. Meanwhile, I secretly reached out to an old college friend, Ryan. We used to work together, and now he was a senior IT security guy. I didn't spill my whole life story. I just told him I needed to recover deleted iPhone data and figure out how to trace hidden bank transactions. Ryan didn't pry. He just told me to get him the iCloud credentials and whatever physical access I could manage. I knew I was entering a new chapter. I was no longer the woman crying in the dark, clutching suspicions, nor was I the woman standing in the kitchen letting them trample my dignity. Brian and Chloe probably thought they were directing this play. But no, from now on, I held the pen. After asking for Ryan's help, I lived in a bizarre duality. By day, I worked at the firm, joking with my colleagues like, my life was perfect. By night, I cooked, cleaned, and played the loving wife. It was so intense I sometimes scared myself. But the second the bedroom door closed or the house fell silent, I sat alone with my phone, waiting for digital pings like a prisoner waiting for a verdict. I knew that once I started down this road, sooner or later I would see things that would destroy me. 2 days later, Ryan called. His voice was subdued right from the jump, as if he knew this was going to be ugly. He wiped the local data pretty well, Ryan said. But that doesn't mean it's gone. A lot of the iMessages were backed up to an old iCloud sync he forgot to disable. I was standing on the balcony of my office building. My grip on my phone was so tight my fingers ached. When Ryan emailed the file, I didn't even dare open it immediately. I stood there for a long time until I was numb enough to click the link. The first few lines on the screen were enough to make me gag. These weren't pitying messages to cheer up a sad girl. This was the language of people who had crossed the line months ago. Chloe, Brian, please don't leave me. I'm only staying with Aaron because of you. That single sentence hit me like a sledgehammer. The poor abused sister-in-law act wasn't new. She had been playing it long enough to confidently make demands of my husband. I scrolled down. The more I read, the colder I got. Disconnected fragments of texts were more than enough to prove this wasn't a brief fling. This was a full-blown, established affair. They coordinated secret meetups. They talked to each other in a way that would make anyone sick. Brian, just relax. I'll take care of everything soon. Chloe, you promised, Brian. Don't make me wait for nothing. But that wasn't even the worst of it. When Ryan sent the financial summary he pulled from old bank notification emails, I realized this rot went much deeper. It wasn't just the large wire transfer I had found. Over the past 6 months, Brian had wired money to Chloe constantly via Venmo, Zelle, and direct transfers. Sometimes a few $100s, sometimes thousands. Sometimes only days apart. The memos were always vague. Groceries, emergency, loan, reimbursement. But among the pile of transactions, one stood out and made my blood run cold. Joint investment. A joint investment with who? In what? Why would a married man take our marital assets to co-invest with his sister-in-law without telling his wife? That question pounded against my skull. That's when I realized something far more terrifying than infidelity. Between them, there wasn't just lust and emotional manipulation. There was calculated financial fraud. And when a dirty affair mixes with greed, it doesn't stop at simple cheating. That night when I got home, my acting had to be Oscar-worthy. I couldn't let Brian or Chloe see that my hand was full of aces. I sat next to Brian on the couch, speaking casually. Hey, I think I'm gonna go stay at my parents' place this weekend. Mom's complaining about her sciatica again, and I haven't seen them in a while. Brian, who had been scrolling on his phone, snapped his head up way too fast. For how many days? Maybe 2 or 3, I said lightly. He nodded, trying to look indifferent, but the brief flash of excitement in his eyes did not escape me. I just smiled coldly in my head. It's true, give rats a little space, and they'll scurry right out into the open. But I didn't go to my parents' house. The next morning, I packed my weekend bag and drove off as usual, but I called my mom and told her if Brian asked, just say I was out running errands. I actually went to an empty condo owned by a coworker who was out of town. I also paid a private investigator Ryan recommended to sit in a parked car and watch who went in and out of my house for the next 48 hours. More importantly, before I left, I had hidden 2 voice-activated audio recorders, one tucked under the living room sofa and another behind the microwave in the kitchen. Those 2 days felt like 2 agonizing months. By day, I worked from the condo, my mind drifting back to my house. By night, I opened my laptop to check the PI's logs and listened to the audio recordings. On the second night, while listening to a track of chairs scraping and glasses clinking, I suddenly heard Chloe's voice clearly. It was soft, but stripped of the usual pathetic whine. She asked directly, "When are you going to divorce, Rachel?" My heart seized. I sat up perfectly straight, terrified to even breathe. Then Brian's voice answered. Low, firm, and chillingly calculated. We have to go slow. The assets are still in her name. With that single sentence, my ears began to ring. My hands shook so violently I dropped the headphones. All the puzzle pieces from the last few months violently slammed together to form a picture far uglier and more vicious than I could have ever imagined. They weren't just screwing behind my back. They weren't just using fake tears to gaslight me. They were plotting, waiting for the right time, waiting until they could legally strip me of everything I owned. I sat in the dark living room of that empty condo for a long time. There were no tears and no curses. I didn't feel the sharp sting of betrayal anymore. The pain had passed, replaced by something entirely different. Something colder, sharper, and utterly ruthless. I stared at the audio file on my laptop, played that sentence one more time, and shut it down. That was the moment I knew I had crossed the absolute point of no return. I was done hurting. I was ready to destroy them. The Arctic chill that settled in my bones after hearing that recording didn't keep me awake. It gave me hyper-focus. I knew if I threw these receipts in their faces right now, Brian would deny it, Chloe would turn on the waterworks, and Eleanor would blame my jealousy for invading their privacy. I had the evidence, but I didn't want to use it just yet. I didn't just want them to admit they were wrong. I wanted their own greed to march them past the point of no return. The next day, I went back to the office as usual. But that evening, as soon as I walked into the house, I initiated a conversation with Brian in the breeziest tone imaginable, as if I didn't have a care in the world. Hey babe, I've been thinking, I said. As a married couple, we should probably streamline our assets. Since the house and the brokerage accounts are solely in my name, God forbid something happens to me, it'd be a legal nightmare for you. What if we meet with a lawyer and transfer some of these assets into a joint trust, or add your name to the deed, just for long-term security? The moment I finished speaking, Brian, who was taking off his Apple Watch, snapped his head up. His reaction was too fast. So fast that I knew instantly my bait had been swallowed whole. He stared at me for a few seconds, then broke into a smile. A forced, natural smile, but his eyes were practically gleaming. He answered almost immediately. I was actually going to bring that up, honey. We're married. If something happens, having everything in both our names is just the smart thing to do. I sat on the edge of the sofa, outwardly calm, but internally I was grinning like the Grim Reaper. I was actually going to bring that up, a sentence that sounded so loving, but to me, it was the sound of a rat stepping on the trap. Whenever I had mentioned organizing our paperwork in the past, Brian always deflected or said later. But today, the second I offered him the deed, he lunged for it like a drowning man grabbing a life preserver. If he hadn't been plotting this all along, he wouldn't be this eager. But I didn't stop there. I pretended to hesitate, then continued, acting as if I was deeply pondering our financial future. There's one more thing. A partner at the firm invited me to buy into a massive new commercial real estate fund. I'm thinking about it. If we're going to liquidate cash for a big investment, we really need the deeds and accounts consolidated so there's no red tape. I said it while looking down, smoothing the edge of my blouse, deliberately avoiding his eyes. I knew perfectly well that every word I spoke was like pouring gasoline on an open flame. Brian paused, then asked in a low voice, "How big of an investment?" "Substantial," I said casually. "If we do it, we'd probably have to leverage all our savings." He nodded, pretending to think it over, but the corner of his mouth twitched. I knew that silence. It wasn't consideration, it was calculation. That night, Brian acted bizarrely perfect. So perfect that an outsider would think he was the husband of the year. After dinner, he voluntarily washed the dishes, asked about my day at the firm, and said, "If you think the investment is a golden opportunity, go for it. I'll always back your play." It made me physically nauseous. Later that night, I didn't fall asleep. I laid with my back to him, faking a slow, rhythmic breathing, waiting. Sure enough, right around midnight, his phone buzzed. Moving incredibly slowly, he threw off the duvet, got out of bed, and slipped out to the backyard patio. I didn't move. I just held my breath and listened. His voice was muffled, but the cadence wasn't the soothing tone he usually used for Chloe's venting. It was rapid, sharp, like someone discussing an urgent business deal. When he crept back into bed, even though he had tiptoed, I could smell the faint scent of a cigarette on his shirt. Brian only smoked when he was scheming. The next morning, I pushed the envelope even further. I purposely sat in the living room and called a friend who worked at a title company. I spoke loudly enough so anyone in the kitchen or on the porch could hear. "Yeah, maybe I'll swing by your office this week to look at some draft quitclaim deeds and joint tenancy paperwork. We have to be super careful. I don't want to sign anything that accidentally exposes us to massive tax liabilities." "Right, yeah. Once it's signed and notarized, it's done." I emphasized tax liabilities, and once it's signed, knowing exactly where Chloe was sitting on the back patio. Sure enough, about 10 minutes later, when I walked past the kitchen, I saw Chloe come inside looking for Eleanor, but her eyes kept darting toward the living room. Her face no longer held that sad, apathetic look. It was a frantic, barely concealed anxiety. That afternoon, while I was supposedly at the grocery store, Ryan's PI sent me a very valuable update. Chloe had secretly met Brian at the end of our street. They spoke rapidly, but the parabolic mic caught one clear sentence from Chloe. "You have to hurry, Brian. An opportunity like this won't happen twice." Reading that text while sitting in my car in a Target parking lot, I almost burst out laughing. It's amazing how quickly human nature reveals its ugliest face the moment it catches the scent of money. That night, I quietly prepared my next move. Thanks to Ryan's connections, I met with a viciously smart contract lawyer. I wasn't doing anything illegal. I just had him draft a set of highly formal asset consolidation and investment agreements. They looked completely legitimate. But buried in the legalese were highly restrictive clauses. If the signatory is found to have engaged in fraud, concealed personal interests, or misused joint assets, the entire agreement is null and void, and the offending party surrenders all rights and agrees to punitive financial damages. I read every line carefully and smiled. No matter how massive their greed was, I was going to let that very greed weave the noose around their necks. 2 days later, I casually announced in front of the whole family that this weekend, I wanted us all to sit down and have a completely transparent conversation about our family finances, so there would be no more misunderstandings. Eleanor nodded approvingly. "See, that's how a wife should act." Brian pretended to be chill, but his eyes betrayed his impatience. Meanwhile, Chloe, sitting in the corner acting like she wasn't involved, stiffened her neck every time the words, deeds, or investments were spoken, her eyes blinking rapidly. I saw it all, noted it all, but said nothing else. I hadn't shown my cards yet. I was just letting out the slack on the fishing line, inch by inch, letting them see the prize dangling right in front of their faces, making them reckless, pushing them to move faster. Because from the very beginning, I didn't want to crush them with my own power. I wanted their own ravenous desires to drag them straight into my trap, and I knew the moment was fast approaching. Ever since the night I proposed openly discussing finances, the atmosphere in the house became unbearable. It was like a ticking time bomb was buried under the floorboards, and nobody knew when it would detonate. On the surface, everything looked normal. Eleanor still walked around barking passive-aggressive orders. Brian still ate dinner on time. Chloe still slinked over with her depressive pout. But if you paid attention, everyone was on high alert. Brian became highly secretive. He no longer left his iPhone on the counter, it lived in his pocket. If it buzzed while he was drinking a beer, he'd instantly stand up and walk outside. Chloe no longer dared to sit shoulder to shoulder with him in plain sight, but their eye contact became excruciatingly obvious. If Brian coughed or stood up, Chloe's eyes tracked him like a laser. This wasn't the behavior of innocent people. This was the behavior of people who knew someone was onto them. And that someone was Aaron. Ever since Brian had violently shoved him to protect Chloe, Aaron's fragile male ego had been shattered. He no longer viewed this as his usual paranoid jealousy. He was looking deeper. Previously, Aaron probably just suspected Chloe was texting some random guy from the mall. It probably never crossed his mind that the man he needed to watch was his own flesh and blood. But once that seed of doubt was planted, it grew like a weed. I watched Aaron change. He stopped throwing screaming fits and throwing things. Instead, he became eerily quiet, constantly observing. One day, when Chloe stepped out to the driveway to take a call, I saw Aaron standing in the shadows of the garage, just staring daggers into her back. Another afternoon, while I was getting the mail, I heard a truck idling at the end of the cul-de-sac. It was Aaron's Ford F-150. He hadn't gone to his shift like he claimed. He was parked out of sight, his eyes glued to our house. He was actively hunting. What had to happen finally happened. One night, around 9 p.m., Chloe was sitting in the corner of our kitchen texting, thinking nobody was watching. But Aaron seemingly materialized out of thin air, standing right behind her. From the living room, I heard Aaron's low, guttural growl. "Who the fuck are you texting that you have to hide the screen?" Then came the screech of a bar stool being pushed back and the sound of a phone being snatched. I didn't even need to go into the kitchen to imagine the scene. Chloe screamed, and Aaron roared like thunder. In seconds, the house was chaos. When I walked in, Aaron had Chloe's phone. His face was beet red, his jaw clenched so hard it looked like it would snap. Chloe, pale as a ghost, lunged to grab it back, but failed. Aaron read something on the screen, his head snapping up, his eyes burning with a mix of fury and intense humiliation. He might not have found explicit proof, maybe just deleted logs or suspicious emojis, but it was enough to ignite the gasoline in his brain. "What is this?" "Huh?" Aaron bellowed. "Why are you texting my brother at 9 p.m.? Chloe shook, but quickly defaulted to her usual playbook. She burst into theatrical tears. "If you don't trust me, then fine. I'm sick of living like this. You check my phone every day. You accuse me of everything. If you want me dead, just say it." That was Chloe's superpower. She always knew exactly how to cry to turn herself into the victim. Her wailing had barely begun when Brian rushed in from the garage. I don't know how much he heard, but the speed at which he threw himself between Aaron and Chloe made me want to laugh out loud. He shoved Aaron backward, shouting, "Knock it off! If you have a problem, use your words. You think you're a tough guy pushing a woman around?" Aaron slowly turned his head to look at his brother. The look in his eyes was murderous. "Don't fucking defend her. You're the one who needs to start explaining," he growled. And I knew right then. The conflict between these two brothers had reached the point of no return. Eleanor scurried in, playing the same old broken record, blaming Aaron for being crazy, pitying Chloe for suffering, and praising Brian for being a noble protector. But the vibe was different this time. Aaron wasn't a reckless hothead anymore. He stared dead into his older brother's eyes with profound, chilling suspicion. Brian, despite playing the innocent peacemaker, looked panicked. Only Chloe kept sobbing like a monsoon. putting on a show that would make a stranger feel sorry for her. I just stood in the corner, watching and listening, feeling incredibly at peace. I realized that this filthy affair was beginning to consume itself. I didn't even need to do much, just one little push in the right spot, and the whole house of cards would collapse. And I knew exactly how to deliver that push. The next morning, Aaron was sitting on his front porch chain-smoking, his face hollow from a sleepless night. I purposely walked over, bringing him a cup of black coffee, and set it on the railing. I didn't immediately bring up the fight. I just sighed, acting as exhausted as he looked, and said vaguely, "Honestly, there are things I don't even know if I should say or not." Aaron whipped his head toward me. Just as I suspected, he was so starved for the truth he'd bite at any crumb. I paused for a few seconds, then spoke softly. "Don't get mad at me for meddling. But lately, Brian has been funneling a lot of money to Chloe. I assumed you knew." With just that one sentence, Aaron's face morphed completely. He didn't say a word, but his grip on his cigarette was so tight it snapped in half. The chaotic anger in his eyes crystallized into a dark, razor-sharp focus. This time, his paranoia was finally pointed at the right target. I didn't say anything else. Sometimes, less is more. You just have to drop one fact and let a suspicious, emasculated man connect the remaining dots with his own shame and bruised ego. As I walked back to my house, I heard the screech of his metal porch chair being violently shoved backward. I didn't look back. I just smiled slightly, because I knew I didn't need to destroy them anymore. They were going to destroy each other. Since I dropped that little comment to Aaron on the porch, everything shifted into overdrive. I could see the change in everyone. Brian wasn't just cautious anymore. He was getting sloppy and desperate. Chloe dropped the innocent victim act. Her eyes were constantly darting, terrified that the dam was about to break. And Aaron, going from a guy who only knew how to yell, became a terrifyingly silent shadow. He didn't speak much, but his silence made everyone's skin crawl. For me, I knew it was time for the final act. I had almost everything I needed. The closet video, the audio recording of Brian and Chloe discussing my assets, the Chase bank wire receipts, the recovered iCloud texts, and the recent audio from the living room bugs. I sat alone in my bedroom, laying it all out on the bed. I re-listened to every recording, highlighted the transcripts, and organized the dates into a timeline. I couldn't afford to be sloppy. I knew that to nuke this situation once and for all, I couldn't rely on screaming and crying. I needed undeniable proof, a flawless sequence of events, and one devastating blow that would make it impossible for them to ever deny it. And the perfect opportunity was literally placed in my lap. This Sunday was the annual family memorial barbecue, marking the anniversary of Brian's grandfather's passing. Every year, it was a massive event. Extended family aunts, uncles, cousins from all over the state would descend on our backyard. It was the kind of suburban family gathering where one juicy piece of gossip would spread through the entire bloodline before the potato salad was even served. I didn't need to look for a venue. This family memorial was going to be the perfect stage to rip the masks off every single one of them. That night at dinner, I casually announced in a tone so serene it shocked even Eleanor. "I've thought about it a lot. After the memorial BBQ on Sunday, I'm going to draft the paperwork to add Brian's name to the deed of the house and the investment accounts. It'll just make things easier. We're married for life anyway. What's mine is his." The second I finished, Brian's fork froze over his plate. It was quick, but I caught it. Eleanor actually looked up, her brief shock melting into smug satisfaction. She cleared her throat and said in a sugary voice, "See? That's how a smart wife behaves. The husband is the head of the household. It's better in his hands than yours." I looked down at my plate, taking a bite of salad as if nothing had happened. But across from me, Chloe sat paralyzed. Just from a peripheral glance, I could see her neck flushing red, her eyes blinking furiously. She didn't dare look at me, but her knuckles were white from gripping her fork. Her inability to hide her reaction was almost comical. My assets had absolutely nothing to do with her, yet she was the one vibrating with impatience. From that day on, Brian and Chloe's desperation peaked. They couldn't wait. My PI reported that in just 2 days, they met 3 separate times at the end of the street and at a Starbucks a mile away. These weren't venting sessions anymore. They were rapid, frantic, tactical meetings. That night, the bug I hid under the sofa picked up a new conversation. The more I listened, the more I realized how quickly greed makes people sloppy. I heard Chloe's voice, hushed but urgent. What if Rachel finds out? I sat in the dark, my AirPods jammed into my ears so hard it hurt. But I could still hear my own heartbeat. Then, Brian's voice, low, decisive, and chillingly cruel. She won't find out. She's too stupid. Hearing that sentence, I pulled my AirPods out, set my phone on the nightstand, and sat in dead silence for a very long time. I thought I was immune to the pain he caused. But it turns out there are words that don't make you cry. They just violently stomp on your soul. Stupid. All these years of building a life together, and to the man sleeping next to me, I was just a gullible idiot. Easy to control, easy to rob, and easy to throw away. That single word eradicated any lingering hesitation I had. If I had any reservations about blowing up the family barbecue, they were gone. I had absolutely no mercy left. I didn't destroy this family. They destroyed it a long time ago. Simultaneously, Aaron wasn't sitting idle. Since I baited him, he had been tailing Chloe almost daily. One afternoon, he came home late and acted like nothing happened, but I saw his F-150 parked and hidden behind a line of oak trees down the road. Another night, he stood in his dark driveway for over an hour, his eyes locked on our living room window where Brian had just stepped out to take a call. Aaron wasn't blindly raging anymore, and that made him dangerous. When a violent man goes quiet and starts observing, it means he already knows in his gut that something filthy is happening. I knew it was time to meet with him privately. Not to tell him everything, but to guide him right to the edge of the cliff. The evening before the BBQ, I texted Aaron to meet me at a sports bar a few towns over, making sure nobody we knew would see us. He looked at me with a mix of hostility and manic impatience. I didn't waste time. I pulled out my phone and played one short audio clip. Just the part where Chloe says, "When are you going to divorce Rachel?" Followed by Brian saying, "The assets are still in her name." That was it. I didn't show him the video, the bank transfers, or anything else. As soon as the clip ended, the blood drained from Aaron's face, only to rush back in a violent shade of crimson. He stood up so fast, his bar stool crashed to the floor. His jaw locked so tight I could hear his teeth grinding over the noise of the bar. "Give me the rest of it," he snarled. I stayed seated, staring blankly at him. Not yet. Aaron leaned over the table, gripping the edge like he wanted to rip it off. "What the fuck are you waiting for, Rachel? They're screwing behind my back." I answered in a voice made of dry ice. "If you want the whole truth, you wait until the BBQ tomorrow. If you blow up now, they'll just lie their way out of it. You'll look like the crazy, abusive husband, and you'll still be the laughingstock. But if you do it at the right time, in the right place, in front of the entire family, neither of them will have anywhere to run." Aaron breathed heavily, his chest heaving. Then he gritted his teeth and gave me one sharp, violent nod. That nod was all I needed. I knew that every single chess piece was finally on its designated square. I went home, locked my bedroom door, and prepped the payload for the final time. Phones, audio files, video clips, printed bank statements, and the contact info of 2 lawyers who could testify to Brian's legal inquiries. I stayed up until 3 a.m. organizing the sequence of evidence, rehearsing what I would say, when I would pause, and exactly which file to play when. I wasn't a weeping, betrayed housewife anymore. I was the producer of a live show where they would be stripped naked by the truth itself. Outside, the wind rustled through the oak trees in the backyard. Inside, everyone was sleeping, assuming tomorrow was just another memorial BBQ with burgers and beers. I was the only one who knew that tomorrow was the day their world ended. I turned off my phone screen, sat in the dark, and whispered to myself, "This time, there's no way out for any of you." Sunday morning, the house was packed by 10 a.m. Relatives from near and far aunts, uncles, cousins flooded the backyard and the living room. The sound of greetings, clinking beer bottles, and the smell of the smoker firing up made it feel like a festive summer party. But my heart was as calm as a frozen lake. I woke up early, picked out a conservative, dark navy sundress, styled my hair perfectly, and put on just enough makeup to look fresh and unbothered. People often assume women shake and crumble right before doing something drastic. But when you have absolutely nothing left to fear, you don't shake. I purposefully helped set up the buffet tables, poured drinks, and arranged the folding chairs, speaking softer and sweeter than usual. It was my eerie calmness that caused Brian and Chloe to lower their guards. I saw it clearly. Brian kept side-eyeing me, trying to read my mind. But when he saw me not mentioning the assets, acting like the perfect hostess to his aunts and uncles, his shoulders visibly relaxed. Meanwhile, Chloe couldn't look me in the eye. She busied herself in the kitchen, but her hands were shaking so badly she spilled a pitcher of sweet tea on the counter. Eleanor, seeing me acting so obedient and knowing my place, let her ego inflate to maximum capacity. While standing on the patio talking to a group of aunts, she deliberately raised her voice so I could hear. That's the difference between a good woman and a bad one. A good wife knows how to be patient and protect her household. If she just runs around screaming like a banshee, she destroys the marriage and makes herself a laughingstock. A few of the aunts nodded in agreement. One even smiled at me, as if praising me for finally waking up. I was walking past with a tray of appetizers. I stopped, turned to the group, and said in a very soft, polite voice, "You're absolutely right, Eleanor. I agree. Some things are best handled clearly when the whole family is gathered together like this." Then I walked away without looking back. But I knew that sentence made at least 3 people freeze. Brian stared at me, Chloe turned chalk white, and Aaron, standing at the edge of the patio, took a long drag of his cigarette and crushed it into the concrete. The memorial toast went as planned. Someone said a prayer, everyone raised a glass to Grandpa, and the uncles started lining up at the grill. Kids were running around the lawn. People were pulling out lawn chairs. The yard was loud and chaotic. And right at that moment, I walked to the center of the patio. Without clinking a glass or raising my voice, I just stood there, holding a manila folder. Slowly, the chatter died down. People turned to look at me. I waited until every single pair of eyes was locked on me before I spoke. Before we eat, I'd like to make an announcement regarding the family and our financial assets. With all the aunts, uncles, and cousins here, I want you all to be my witnesses. Hearing the word assets, heads perked up. Most of them probably assumed I was officially announcing the transfer of my property into Brian's name, as I had hinted earlier in the week. Eleanor even cleared her throat and stood taller, looking smug. Brian forced a smile, trying to look relaxed, but his eyes were burning with anticipation. I gripped the manila folder and said with crystal clarity, enunciating every syllable, "I used to think I could trust my husband with my money and my home. But before I hand over the deeds, I need to clarify one thing. Does this man even deserve to be called my husband?" The entire backyard froze. The kids stopped running. Nobody reached for a beer. You could hear a pin drop. Brian reacted first. He let out a nervous, awkward chuckle, trying to play it off like I was making a bad joke. "Rachel, babe, what are you doing?" "It's a memorial BBQ, don't start drama." I looked dead into his eyes. There was no tremor in my body. "Drama? You think I could ever compete with the drama you've been directing?" As soon as the words left my mouth, I pulled out my iPhone, connected it to the Bluetooth patio speaker, and hit play on the first audio file. A split second of static, and then Chloe's voice blasted across the backyard, crystal clear. "When are you going to divorce Rachel?" Followed immediately by Brian's low, calculated voice. "We have to go slow. The assets are still in her name." From just that 5-second clip, several aunts gasped out loud. "Oh my God," someone whispered. Eleanor turned to stone. Brian's forced smile vanished, his eyes wide with absolute horror. He couldn't believe I had the guts to play it at the family reunion. Chloe was the first to panic. She jumped out of her chair, her face devoid of blood, screaming hysterically. "No! That's fake! It's AI! She edited that to frame me." I slowly turned to her, watching her lips tremble, and replied with surgical precision. "Framed you? That's funny. Your voice sounds incredibly authentic. Or do you want me to play the video of you two in my master bedroom so the whole family can judge for themselves?" The backyard felt like a morgue. A few cousins turned to look at Chloe, their expressions shifting from shock to pure disgust. At that exact moment, crash. Aaron violently hurled his beer bottle at the brick grill. Glass shattered everywhere. His face was a dark, venomous red, the veins in his neck bulging against his skin. He pointed a trembling finger right at Chloe's face and roared, "You lying bitch! Answer me! Have you been fucking my brother?" Before Aaron could even lunge at her, Brian instinctively jumped up and threw himself in front of Chloe to protect her, a reflex no innocent brother-in-law would ever have. That one action sealed it. Nobody in that yard thought this was a misunderstanding anymore. I stood perfectly still, my phone in my hand scanning the crowd. I hadn't even shown the video, the wire transfers, or the heavier recordings yet. I had only peeled back the first layer of their mask. But it was enough to make every relative understand that this BBQ was over. This had become a public tribunal, and nobody was going to be eating potato salad anytime soon. Once I broke eye contact with the stunned crowd, everything exploded exactly as I knew it would. Aaron lost his mind. He kicked a folding chair out of the way and charged at Brian like a cornered pit bull. The sound of his boots slamming against the deck was followed by a sickening crack as his fist connected dead center with his older brother's face. It was so hard I heard the bone pop. Brian stumbled backward, crashing into the buffet table, sending trays of food flying. His lips split open instantly, blood dripping down his chin. "You're my fucking brother," Aaron screamed, his voice shredding with pure agony. "And you're fucking my wife?" The backyard erupted. Mothers grabbed their kids and dragged them inside. Aunts clutched their pearls and backed away. The uncles rushed forward, tackling Aaron to the ground to keep him from beating Brian to death right there on the grass. But what shocked the crowd even more than the violence was Chloe's reaction. She didn't run to her husband to calm him down. She didn't cower like an innocent victim. Instead, she shrieked and threw herself onto the ground next to Brian. The frantic way she grabbed his shoulders, the way she hovered over him sobbing, "Brian, are you okay?" was a slap in the face to everyone watching. An older aunt standing near the patio door muttered, "Lord have mercy, it's actually true." With that single sentence, the last shred of their dignity evaporated. But the person who disgusted me the most was Eleanor. Surrounded by the chaos, her oldest son bleeding, her youngest son screaming in a chokehold, and her daughter-in-law cradling her lover, she didn't slap Chloe. She didn't demand the truth from Brian. The very first thing she did was point a trembling finger directly at my face and screech, "You wicked bitch. You caused a scene at a memorial just to humiliate this family? You dragged our name through the mud." I actually laughed. A cold, hollow laugh. After everything, all she cared about was the family's image. I looked her dead in the eye and said one sentence. "Am I the one dragging your name through the mud, Eleanor? Or did your son do that all by himself?" Heads snapped toward Eleanor. The glares from her own sisters and cousins were filled with judgment. Brian, leaning against the table wiping the blood from his mouth, was still trying to spin it. He looked wildly at the crowd, pointing at Chloe. His voice was shaky, desperately clinging to his white knight persona. "Don't listen to Rachel. This is all because of Chloe. I just felt sorry for her. Aaron beats her, he abuses her. I was just trying to help her and I had a moment of weakness. I knew if I let him keep talking, he'd blame the entire affair on rescuing a victim. I didn't give him the oxygen. I picked up the iPad I had synced to the TV mounted on the patio, hit AirPlay, and played the video. The screen lit up. Even in the daylight, the footage from inside my walk-in closet was damningly clear. The entire extended family watched Brian open the bedroom door. They watched Chloe follow him in. They watched Brian, not Chloe, wrap his arms around her waist and pull her against him. Several people physically turned their heads away in disgust, but I let it play. Brian stroked her hair. He kissed her forehead. Chloe melted into his chest like a woman who had been doing this for years. There was no more denying. No more I was just comforting her. The truth was playing in 4K right next to the grill. Eleanor stared at the TV. All the color drained from her face. Her usually vicious mouth just trembled, completely mute. Aaron, seeing the video, went absolutely feral. He broke free from his uncles and lunged at Chloe, grabbing her by the throat. Her face turned purple in seconds. It took 3 grown men to pry his hands off her and pin him to the grass. Chloe collapsed, coughing and gasping for air, and immediately reverted to her classic playbook. She wailed, pounding the deck, trying to make herself the ultimate victim. But in her panic, she exposed herself completely. Pointing a shaking finger at Brian, she screamed, "It wasn't just me. Brian promised he would marry me. He told me he was buying me my own apartment. He said we just had to wait a little longer." That confession hit the crowd like a bomb. I didn't let the silence go to waste. I stepped forward, my voice cutting through the air like a whip. "Buying you an apartment with whose money?" "With the money he stole from my joint accounts." I pulled the printed Chase Bank statements from the manila folder and slammed them onto the patio table. Page after page of highlighted dates, wire amounts, and recipient names. It wasn't a verbal accusation anymore. It was black and white financial records. The aunts who had been skeptical crowded around the table, their eyes widening at the dollar amounts. An older uncle at the front slammed his fist on the table and roared at Brian, "You piece of shit! You do this and you still have the nerve to show your face at your grandfather's memorial?" The mood in the yard shifted from shock to open, aggressive contempt. But I knew if I stopped here, Chloe could still spin it like she was a naive girl brainwashed by an older man. I wasn't leaving her an exit. I pulled up the iCloud text logs Ryan had recovered and read them aloud for the entire family. "Brian, hurry up and handle this. I can't stand living with Aaron anymore. Make sure you get the house, the cars, and the cash like you promised." Dead silence. Nobody looked at Chloe with pity anymore. The woman sobbing on the deck wasn't just a cheating wife. She was a gold digger who had meticulously plotted her exit strategy. Chloe froze, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. Brian looked like a corpse. Eleanor collapsed into a lawn chair, her shoulders shaking. Not out of remorse, but because for the first time in her life, she had no words left to defend her golden child. In front of the entire family, all their masks had been incinerated. Brian was a traitor, Chloe was a parasite, and Eleanor was the blind enabler who cultivated this rot. But the grand finale was still coming. I looked around, letting the heavy, suffocating silence press down on them. That silence is precious. It's the moment when people are too shell-shocked to invent a lie to save themselves. I took a step back, rested my hands on the table, and said softly, yet loud enough for the back row to hear, "If this was just an affair, I wouldn't have ruined a memorial to say it. What I want you all to see is that they didn't just sleep together in my bed. They plotted to leave me homeless." Whispers erupted instantly. Relatives looked at each other in disbelief. Cheating was dirty, but plotting to steal someone's home and assets? That crossed the line into sociopathic fraud. I opened my folder and pulled out 2 thick stacks of legal documents, slamming them onto the table. "One stack is the trap I laid," I explained calmly. "The fake quitclaim deeds and trust transfers I told Brian I was going to sign. The other stack? Those are the actual legal consults Brian secretly initiated with a divorce attorney to figure out how to transfer my premarital property into his sole name." I laid them side by side and continued. I baited Brian into thinking he was one signature away from taking my house. And just like I thought, he got greedy. Thanks to a title company investigator, I know he already drafted fraudulent power of attorney paperwork. He was just waiting for me to slip up. Or to forge my signature. To take it all. Brian's ashen face turned ghost white. His eyes darted around in a panic, and his hands balled into fists. I stared right through him, dropping the husband title completely. "You pulled my signature from old tax returns. You had someone draft fake deeds. You were just waiting for the right moment to steal my house, weren't you?" The family went ballistic. An uncle stood up, pointing a grilling spatula at Brian. "Jesus Christ, Brian! Are you insane?" Brian stammered, his smooth talking completely short-circuiting. "Rachel, who told you that? I didn't do anything." "You didn't do it because you hadn't succeeded yet, not because you didn't plan to." I hit play on the final audio recording. Brian's voice blasted through the speaker, arrogant and lethal. "As soon as the house is in my name, it's over. If she finds out, it'll be too late. When we divorce, I'll throw her a few grand to shut her up, and that'll be it." Nobody could sit still. People were cursing aloud. An older aunt crossed herself. Several uncles glared at Brian like he was a complete stranger. This wasn't an affair born of passion. This was a calculated, months-long financial ambush. Aaron, who had been held down on the grass, suddenly stopped fighting. He stood up, chest heaving, and let out a broken, horrifying laugh. He looked at his brother, then at his wife. His voice sounded like grinding metal. "Fucking incredible. One is fucking my brother and the other is trying to rob his own wife blind. And I'm the biggest idiot in the family." Right then, Eleanor desperately tried to save her son one last time. She stood up on shaking legs, grabbing the edge of the table. He was just talking. Men say stupid things when they're stressed." I turned to her. My heart was absolute ice. If she was just blindly defending her child, people might pity her. But she wasn't blind. She was an accomplice. And I had been waiting for this exact moment to drop the curtain on her too. I pulled out my phone, airplayed the final video from the PI. It was footage from a Ring doorbell camera across the street. The video was slightly grainy, but unmistakable. Eleanor looked left and right, then shoved a manila envelope into Brian's hands. Her voice, caught on the mic, was a vicious hiss. "Hurry up and get her to sign it. If you wait, she's gonna figure it out." The moment that audio played, the backyard fell into the kind of silence usually reserved for a funeral. It wasn't whispering anymore. It was the silence of absolute revulsion. Eleanor froze. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. The backlash from the family was immediate. One of her own sisters pointed at her, her voice trembling with rage. "You call yourself a mother? You helped him try to steal from your own daughter-in-law? You sicken me." An uncle shook his head in disgust. "This whole branch of the family is rotten to the core." I stood there, watching Eleanor, the woman who had spent years acting morally superior and demanding my submission, trembling in terror as her own family shunned her. But Chloe, seeing the ship completely sinking, tried to pivot like a snake to save her own skin. She crawled toward Aaron, sobbing hysterically, grabbing his jeans. "Aaron, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Please, just forgive me this one time." But Aaron wasn't the screaming hothead anymore. Stripped of his pride in front of everyone, his eyes were dead. He looked down at Chloe like she was a rotting animal on the side of the road. His voice was a raspy whisper. "You don't need to apologize. As of right now, you are dead to me." Chloe let go of his leg, collapsing onto the grass, as if all the bones in her body had vanished. Eleanor, realizing her eldest son was about to be divorced and sued, and her youngest son had just thrown his wife away, went into full panic mode. She lunged at the table to grab the legal documents, screaming like a banshee. "You evil bitch! You're trying to destroy my son's life? Have you no heart?" Before she could touch the papers, her own sister stepped in front of her, shoving her back. "Rachel isn't evil, Eleanor. You and your son are criminals." Nobody else stepped in to help her. Some looked away, others shook their heads. For the first time in her life, the matriarch was entirely abandoned in her own backyard. I knew it was time to play my final card, the one card Brian absolutely did not see coming. I looked at him, then swept my gaze over the crowd. My voice was flat, sharp as a scalpel. "Oh, by the way, there's one thing you don't know. 3 days ago, I locked you out of every joint account. I filed a temporary restraining order on the house and all marital assets, and I handed the original deeds over to my attorney." I paused, letting the reality crush him. "In other words, Brian, you have absolutely nothing left. I checkmated you before you even sat down at the board." I watched Brian physically deflate. His shoulders caved in, his eyes went vacant. The slick, calculating arrogance he had worn for months shattered on the patio floor. He finally understood. The web he had been spinning for months, the money, the house, the mistress, the fake deeds was completely annihilated. The money was gone. The house was untouchable. His mistress was sobbing at his brother's feet. His mother was a pariah. He thought he was playing me, but I had locked him in a cage before he even made his move. I looked at him one last time and delivered the final verdict in front of his entire family. "You thought I was stupid because I stayed quiet. But the biggest fool in the room is the one who mistakes someone's silence for ignorance." After saying that, I felt a massive boulder lift off my chest. It wasn't the euphoric rush of a victory, but a profound sense of peace. The kind of peace you feel when you finally secure justice for yourself. As I reached for my purse, Aaron stepped into the middle of the patio. He wasn't violent. He wasn't screaming. He stood in front of me, his eyes bloodshot, his voice thick with gravel. "Rachel, I'm a piece of shit. But I am so sorry. I couldn't control my own wife, and I let you get dragged through this filth." I looked at him. In all the years I'd known him, it was the first time I saw Aaron genuinely bow his head. Not out of fear, but out of the realization of how disastrous his own life choices had been. I didn't say I forgave him. I didn't comfort him. I just gave him a slow nod. That was enough. I grabbed my bag, turned around, and walked out of the backyard. Nobody tried to stop me. Nobody had the right to. Behind me, the house still stood. The walls were intact. The smoker was still running. But I knew that the moment I walked down that driveway, the honor and dignity of the people left in that yard had been completely and permanently eradicated. After that explosive memorial BBQ, everything unraveled with blinding speed. When the truth is ripped out by the roots, people lose the energy to fight. Brian didn't contest the divorce. He signed the papers faster than he ever signed his business contracts. But his hand shook, and he couldn't look me in the eye. Not because he still loved me, but because he knew he was utterly defeated. He didn't lose because I was a mastermind. He lost because he marched himself straight off a cliff. Aaron kicked Chloe out of the house that exact same day. I heard from a neighbor that she stood on the front lawn for hours, crying until she lost her voice, but Aaron never unlocked the door. He didn't lock her out in a fit of rage. He locked her out because his absolute final boundary had been crossed. But life isn't a fairy tale where the mistress runs into the arms of her lover. Brian immediately cut contact with her. He was too busy scrambling to save the scraps of his own life and reputation to care about her. Chloe went from thinking she was upgrading to a new apartment to crashing hard on the pavement with absolutely nowhere to go. Eleanor was no longer the loud, overbearing matriarch. After the BBQ, she became a recluse. But her silence wasn't born of regret. It was born of profound humiliation. I heard that at later family events, her own sisters wouldn't even say hello to her. They'd just look at her, turn around, and whisper. For a woman who lived her entire life for appearances, that was the ultimate death sentence. Brian lost far more than a wife. The story about him seeking legal counsel to steal my assets, backed by audio recordings, couldn't be contained. His reputation in the local construction business tanked. Contractors and suppliers slowly distanced themselves. Nobody had to say it to his face. One cautious look was enough to tell him nobody trusted him anymore. Once trust is shattered in business, it never really comes back. Of everyone left behind, Aaron was the only one who made me think. Not out of pity, but because the last time I saw him, his eyes were different. The toxic rage and possessiveness were gone. He was quiet, subdued. Maybe after all the carnage, he finally realized that if he hadn't been an abusive, controlling hothead, treating his wife like property, none of this would have escalated the way it did. But realization doesn't build a time machine. At least he finally knew his own flaws. As for me, a lot of people told me I won, but I never felt like I was competing against anyone. I just took back what was rightfully mine. My assets, my truth, my dignity, and my right to walk away from a toxic marriage with my head held high. It wasn't a loud, cheering victory. It was a quiet, internal peace. I knew I didn't owe anyone a damn thing. When a coworker asked me if I still harbored hatred, I paused, then answered lightly, I used to. But then I realized that the people who betray each other eventually turn their own lives into a prison. Saying it made me feel incredibly light. Holding on to hate keeps you chained to the past. Letting it go is how you actually move forward. I bought a new condo a few towns over, not too far, but far enough that I'd never run into the ghosts of my past. I poured myself into my career, decorated my new place, and learned to love the quiet evenings. I didn't have to wait up for anyone, and I didn't have to analyze every text message to figure out who was lying to me. At first, the silence was a bit lonely, but I quickly realized it wasn't scary. It made me feel more alive than I had in years. Brian only came to see me once. He stood outside my front door. He didn't look sharp like he used to. His voice was raspy. Rachel, I lost everything. I stared at him for a moment, then replied softly, No, Brian, you didn't lose anything because of, not out of revenge, but simply to close a chapter of my life I had no intention of ever reading again. Sometimes I still think about what happened, but it doesn't carry the crushing weight it used to. I'm not grateful for the trauma. Nobody wants to go through that kind of hell. But I am deeply grateful for the day I had the clarity to walk out of it. Because from the ashes of a life that burned to the ground, I finally found myself again.